Have you ever had a game that screams, "This looks like my type of game"? But then as you play the game forward, you got less and less excited by it. Haven is a game that makes me feel that way. I saw this game in my timeline for a while and it looked pretty interesting, especially when I really like the works of the artists that work on this game. And I especially love the works that the game bakers did previously, which was Fury. Fury was great and I absolutely recommend that game. Haven, on the other hand, well, as I play the game forward, I got less and less enthusiastic about it, so allow me to try to explain why. In an unknown distant future, a couple escapes from whatever conservative lifestyle that their old society imposes on them, specifically arbitrary matchmaking. The woman is you, a light-skinned, snarky, white-haired girl who can fly in the air and is not Cat from Gravity Rush because 1, she's an engineer and uses her engineering skills to use the float to fly, and 2, she actually got laid. Okay, that was petty. The next one is Kay, a biologist who has a skin as brown as Katara and personality about as lively and quirky as Aang, so I chose to believe that he is either their descendant or their long-lost abandoned son. Together, they escape the oppressive lives of the old world to take a journey into a new world that they name Source. What kind of mysteries that they will uncover as they explore to the depths of their new Source? Will the people at the old world find them and bring them into justice? Will this game not utterly disappoint me? As for the game itself, it's a role-playing game where you control both couples and an invisible third person in the ship through a first-person perspective, like you're the cameraman to an X-rated video. You wander around the source finding resources to survive. You want to make sure that you eat enough because your attacks won't be as effective otherwise. You traverse through the levels by gliding from one place into the next. The combat system is a real-time turn-based hybrid. How it works is each analog stick or D-pads or face buttons control the action of each half of the couple. And before you ask, yes, you can play co-op with your significant other or someone you really want to get intimate with. Now let's get this out of the way before we get into the other stuff. I freaking love the music in this game. I am a huge fan of electronic music, and the electro music accompanying through the game is quite the treat for me and makes me want to continue the game even further. The ship music in particular is one really good chill track that sets the atmosphere very well. What surprises me is that the music of the game is done by Danger, who made a couple of music I really like. The visuals are also very impressive. A lot of the artworks in the game are very distinctly artworks by Kyorin, and they're absolutely incredible. Big fan of that. The game chose a little bit of a cel-shading look for the character models, which doesn't always work at certain environments, but it works for what the game is trying to do. Everything else, on the other hand, like the landscape and the skies, are incredibly vibrant and pleasant to look at, all of which complemented very well with the game's beautiful character animations and your way of traversing through the levels, which is by gliding your way using the flow. One particular highlight that I want to mention in regards to the visuals are the creatures. The creatures and the animals around the world are super freaking adorable, especially when they decided to follow you around after you save them. Petting them and scratching them do make my heart flutters, especially when they're being very expressive about it. And yes, you can pet around a lot of the animals in the game, and doing so is going to warm even the most jaded of hearts. I have one problem with the visuals though. I would appreciate the artworks a lot more if they're in higher resolution. I'm playing this game on 1080p, and while the dialogue portraits are top-notch and high quality, the boot menu's resolution looks like it's 480p at best, and I can actually notice the pixels. When you're developing a game in mind, these very complex artworks should be 4K at the very least, and this does not look like 4K to me. Other than that, I love the visuals and the audio. It definitely resonates with me. The rest of the game, on the other hand, well, let's talk about them. I'm gonna start with the writing because this is an aspect that will certainly break the deal to a lot of people. The game focuses only on the couple and no one else. Later down the line, there are other characters that interact with the two, but you are stuck with them 99% of the time. So the writing of these two is the central element that glues the entire game together, and they should not screw it up. So, did they screw it up? Well, I'm going to describe how the writing goes, and I'll leave that to your judgment. The dialogues are written to be really quirky and funny, and cringy in a millennial or zoomer sense. Essentially the kind of dialogues that Life is Strange loves to write, and I guarantee that they will make you feel really old. I certainly felt that, and I'm 22 years old. The two couples are giving snarks and quips to each other, and to be fair, some of it can be rather funny, but a lot of times their attempts in being quirky ended up missing for me. It's all a matter of frequency because they're spamming those quite a lot. Even at serious or dramatic times, these two people are snarking at each other so much, it makes the game feel like it's trying to make me laugh with its young people humor. A lot of the dialogues can be summed up as A does something, B gives snarky remark, A retorts with equally snarky remark, repeat, replace A and B with either K or U, and bam, you get 99% of the dialogues in the game. That brings me to my next problem with the dialogues, and a very significant one that becomes a huge problem in a game that is centered on a couple. Thanks to the two snarking at each other all the time, I legitimately think that K and U are the same character. I mean, it makes sense. They're a couple after all, and that's why they resonate with each other and complete each other's sentences. But there's not a lot of contrast between the two, or a significant thing that makes them different other than what's between their legs and their skin color. I suppose K is more adventurous and takes more risk, and U is a little less so. K can get angry easily, and U a lot less so. But even that can go either way, and I really can't describe their personality in any detailed manner, other than that they're both very snarky, quirky, likes to roleplay, and act way younger than their actual age. I've seen twins with more distinct personality. Come to think of it, there's barely any conflict with the two couples at all. It's all so wholesome and saccharine, and I get that the whole game is about being sweet and wholesome, but the same thing can be said to candies, and I don't like to eat that every 5 minutes. What I want from the two is some form of struggle or disagreement or any forms of conflict that aren't arbitrarily resolved by snarking at each other. A genuine emotional moment where the two ponders their relationship and whether or not this entire decision is totally worth it. Something to test their love for each other so that we as the audiences feel that their love is earned rather than just given to us. And that leads me to my next big problem. The game starts with them already in the planet, already a couple who love each other, and their backstory in how they met is left on conversations when they reminisce in how they met. I'm sorry, but you do not leave that kind of plot point, including the entire backstory in why you leave the society in the first place, in freaking dialogues. That is something that you show to us so that we as the audiences feel invested with the characters and buy the fact that they are a couple. Let us see how each characters earn their love for each other. That would be more convincing than, hey, they're a couple, deal with it, which I am willing to buy if it weren't for the fact that we're stuck with them 99% of the time. But putting all of that aside, it's not that I hate all of their interactions. They are pretty wholesome, and they're definitely not despicable characters that make me want to shove them into the volcano. It's just that the writing could have been better. The comedy could have been better paced so that they don't feel like being spammed into my face. The backstories could have been shown to us rather than told in dialogues so that their romance feel more earned rather than just given to us. And the characters could have been a lot more fleshed out so that they don't feel like they're the same person. To be fair to the game, as the game goes on, I've gotten a lot more used to the interactions, and they're starting to grow and grow a lot more on me. The characters do eventually get into more serious conflicts, and the plot actually reveals more interesting details. They are incredibly predictable details, but at least they managed to jolt the plot with genuine interest that makes me want to keep playing to figure out what happens next. But all of that positive vibes got lower and lower as I continue playing the game, and the disappointment eventually comes back. I managed to max out my character's levels, and I'm about 6 hours into the game. That's when I'm starting to worry. Then a couple more hours later, specifically 8 hours and 35 minutes in, and the game reaches its conclusion. Wait, what? I only explored like, a quarter portion of the entire world, and you're telling me that the game just ends right there? You're telling me that I can explore only a quarter of the world and still manage to finish the game? What about the many other subplots that you introduced throughout the course of the story? You can't just tell me that they're left optionally when you introduce that point right in the main story. It's like if you're in Persona 5 and Kamoshida being an abusive gym teacher is never addressed, so the plot can just move on straight into the final boss. The ending isn't even that meaningful because it just goes back to the original premise of the story, which is the two characters escaping their world to form their own life. The ending, or at least the one that I got, just puts the nail in the coffin and say, yup, these two characters are totally right to do that, rather than challenging their perspective and suggest the idea that maybe what they're doing is not exactly the wisest decision. It might sound incredibly harsh, but the best moment in the game to me is when Kei and Yu are arguing with each other, because the conflict is actually meaningful. They're questioning their decision in living in this place. They're questioning their love for each other. But as soon as that happens, they just make up and all of that is forgotten. I don't know. Maybe there are multiple endings and I missed the true ending somewhere along the line. Maybe there are tons and tons of other story content that I miss on the many parts of the source, so I'm just gonna reload my previous save and go back to where I missed those parts. I would, if the game hadn't overwritten my save file. The game uses autosave for only a single slot. In an RPG, that is the absolute worst sin that you can ever commit. So you're telling me that I have to play through the game again to get to whichever parts that I miss? How about allowing us to have multiple saves? How about having multiple autosaves? Come to think of it, the game doesn't give me any forms of manual save. And if it did, the game never tells me. I was rather baffled in the fact that the game has the option to load a specific save in the main menu. When I went to that option, there is an option to clone the save. So you're telling me that you have the ability to clone save files, but you don't have the ability to inform the player that they have to do it, or inform the player in how to manually save, or have manual save in general. Now, I would love to replay the game again if the gameplay is fun, but I think it's time we talk about that. Haven has one strength in its gameplay department, and that's the gliding, or the skating, or flowing, or however you want to describe this. Gliding through the level is pretty smooth and fun, for at least a good portion. The rest would lead you into bumping to walls, but I do enjoy gliding and skating through the level and flying around the area. It's pretty fun for the most part, and I'm gonna say that first, because I have other, more severe and important complaints. The game proclaims that the default difficulty is not that hard, which is only theoretically true. The mechanics being introduced in the game are not quite like any other RPGs. As I said, the game's combat is a hybrid real-time turn-based combat, and you either control the two characters separately or your partner controls the other character. When you enter the combat section, if you want to select a character's action, you have to hold the corresponding button or aim your analog sticks at the very specific direction of the action that you want to take. That's my very first problem with the gameplay. You have to hold the button to perform the action. Why? I don't see why you can just tap the button. I mean, yes, the characters are required to charge their attack, and there is a special duo combo attack that requires you to hold the button and time them properly. But if the player wants to just quickly give the order to the character, especially if the player wants them to attack individually, holding down the button only adds more complications into the mix. The gameplay, specifically the combat, is theoretically easy because it sounds simple on paper. There's nothing wrong about holding down the button or aiming the analog sticks to perform the action. The problem is doing all of that in the middle of an intense combat while having to control two characters at the same time. Remember when I say that it's a real-time turn-based hybrid? Holding down a button or aiming the analog stick to select an action, not a big deal. Giving orders to two characters by holding the buttons in the middle of the action where enemies are straight up hounding you is going to require a little bit of time getting used to. And believe me when I say that this combat system requires quite a bit of time to get used to. So regardless of how good you are in RPGs, I recommend reducing the difficulty and change the accessibility options so that it's a lot easier early on. This is not a typical real-time turn-based hybrid thanks to the fact that your actions require you to hold the buttons rather than select the action on the menu. This would require you to relearn some new reflexes so that you can smoothly give orders to two characters with no issues. And even if I get used to with the combat and I bump the difficulty back up again so that there's more challenge, my biggest complaint with the game is that it's just not fun. This hybrid combat system is really unintuitive. I love how this hybrid combat makes your character to arbitrarily freeze themselves just so that they can get hit by the enemy. I love how if you already assign a specific action to the character before they got hit by the enemy, before they freeze themselves, that action will then only be performed after the character got hit by the enemy. I love how if you want to change the action after realizing that your character is only sitting their ass all day waiting to get hit by the enemy, after you get hit by the enemy, you have to charge the action all over again. Say what you want about Final Fantasy's hybrid combat system, at least you assign the actions by tapping it. I don't understand why the combat has to be this hybrid real-time turn-based combo, especially when this is coming from the developers of Fury, the boss rush game that requires genuine reflexes and skills. They clearly have the capacity to make those kinds of games, but for some reason, this one gets a real-time turn-based hybrid? Maybe it'd be more fun playing it in co-op, but why would I want to play this game in co-op when there are many other better co-op games out there that I can play? Other than that, the rest of the gameplay is just okay. I like the survival mechanic where you have to gather up tons and tons of food and how being hungry will actually affect your combat effectiveness, but it doesn't really matter because it's only a matter of time before you are stuck with enough food to last you for a lifetime. Not to mention the fact that food grows pretty quickly in this region and plentiful as well. I like how almost every action that you do gives us more interactions with the two characters. I like how as the game progresses, the loading screens become more and more intimate. I really don't like how you have to go back into the ship and celebrate to level up. I suppose it makes it more eventful, but I do need the upgrades and I don't want to go back to the ship just to get it. As for the PC port, the game is rather bare bones. Only a couple of basic settings that don't really change a whole lot. The game runs on 60 FPS pretty smoothly for the most part until it stutters and chugs at some specific points in the game. The game doesn't have ultra-wide support for my brand new ultra-wide monitor, and I thought it did when the game starts off with a wide aspect ratio, but my hopes were soon deflated when the maximum resolution is 16:9 1080p. Also, the controller support is a bit wonky. It doesn't work with my DS4 Windows. It can only work with Steam's controller interface for some reason. In conclusion, I am shockingly disappointed with Haven. I am legitimately interested with the premise of the game, an RPG where you control a couple being drawn by a really good artist I like, composed by a producer I like, and being developed by a game developer who makes a game I like. It's the perfect combination to absolutely impress me. However, the game failed to capture that initial expectation. This game has so many severe flaws that prevent me from really enjoying it in a way that a lot of people enjoy it. I'm probably gonna have a line of sight being directed at me after this review, but I just can't find myself to say that this game is good. It's far from the worst game that I played, but it is so painfully average. The story is not great. The writing tries so desperately to be funny. The quips could have been toned down a bit. The gameplay takes some time to get used to, and even then, it's not very fun. The combat is rather unintuitive. The lack of manual save or any instructions in how to manually save frustrate me to an infuriating degree. It does, however, look pretty. The art style is top notch. It has a very wholesome vibe to the entire thing. I don't end up hating the two characters at the end, and it's pretty fun gliding around the levels. So, do I recommend Haven? Unfortunately, no, for most people. The game costs 25 bucks, and I only recommend it if it goes to an 80 to 90% discount. If you want a good co-op game that is actually fun, I recommend Portal 2, preferably with new maps. If you want a good RPG with a good love story, I recommend Trails in the Sky 1 and 2. They're more expensive, but they're a lot longer, offer a more fulfilling love story. The character's love is earned, and the dialogues don't make me feel like a boomer.